The Second Parthian Nero. Nero, an exhibit for China. The Chinese envoys received by the Parthian king Pacorus II would have noticed a strange figure at the royal court. The man was seated at a place of honour and dressed in bizarre robes, quite unlike Iranian court costume or Parthian riding attire. Instead of military equipment, this odd individual carried an unfamiliar-looking musical instrument. The envoys from the Han Empire were informed that this stranger was a former ruler of a great western state. His new lord and master, Pacorus, planned to restore him to power in the place the Chinese called Da Qin, Rome. Would the honoured ambassadors like to see him perform? My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin. The question is, who was this third impersonator, the second Parthian Nero, and what was his purpose? Another Nero appears in the reign of the Emperor Domitian, the younger son of Vespasian, who came to power late in the year AD 81. However, by AD 88, Domitian was facing serious opposition from within the Roman state. Domitian was an autocratic ruler who greatly increased the authority and dominance of the imperial court in Roman politics. He maintained tyrannical control over the army and conducted violent purges of the senatorial class. The surviving Nero myth perhaps gave members of the imperial elite hope that the Flavian dynasty might be replaced with something more like the preceding Julio-Claudian system. Maybe after 2 decades of Flavian rule, there was increased enthusiasm for political change and growing nostalgia for the former establishment. Evidence for this third Pseudo-Nero comes from the work of Suetonius, who knew of this second pretender backed by the Parthian Empire. Suetonius confirms that when he was a young man, rumours of this false Nero first spread through Rome. This suggests that the third impostor appeared almost 2 decades after the death of the real Nero, placing the events in AD 88. Nero would have been almost 50 years old by this period, but perhaps the impostor adopted the image of the eternally young emperor, gifted in musical skills and talented in performing arts. The image of the emperor as a young man had been everywhere, on statues, on coins, and in person before the ordinary people in Greece and Rome. Perhaps an aged version of Nero would not have convinced anybody. Did Pacorus believe the Nero impostor? Not necessarily. The Parthians had a good understanding of Roman politics and the symbols of imperial power. They could therefore have used impostors and proxies to usurp and challenge Roman influence. Pacorus could have promoted this false Nero to encourage dissension among the Roman elite. But maybe he had other motives. Plutarch mentions an incident in 53 BC when the Parthian general Surena defeated and destroyed an invading Roman army led by a commander named Crassus. Crassus was one of the richest and most influential men in Republican Rome. He was killed trying to escape the battle site of Carrhae, and his head was taken to Armenia as a military trophy. It was rumoured that molten gold was poured into the mouth of his severed skull as a symbol of his greed. Even in this early period, the Parthians and their subjects understood the symbolism of a Roman military triumph. Surena organised an insulting mock performance of a triumph in the city of Seleucia, the Greek-style capital of Babylonia. The Greek, Jewish and Babylonian subjects of the city all witnessed this Roman humiliation. Surena arranged for this mock triumph to be led by an individual playing the part of the deceased commander Crassus. But in place of the ornate purple toga worn by a conquering general, the impersonator was wearing a woman's dress. The imperial symbol of power, the fasces, a bundle of wooden rods tied around an axe, had also been subverted. Thousands of Roman legionaries were marched in this procession, exhausted, traumatized, and in many cases suffering debilitating injuries to their feet and hands. Plutarch reports, Serenus sent messages to Seleucia that he was bringing Crassus there alive. He prepared a ridiculous procession, which he insultingly called a triumph. He forced a captive, named Gaius Basinius, who resembled Crassus, to put on a woman's royal robe. He made him answer to the name Crassus and the title of Imperator whenever this was called out. Basinius was then conducted through the city on horseback. Before him rode trumpeters and a few lictors borne on camels. Purses were suspended from the fasces of the lictors, and newly severed Roman heads hung from their axes. Behind them followed the prostitutes of Seleucia, and behind them musicians, who sang many insulting and ridiculous songs about the effeminacy and cowardice of Crassus. And this display was performed for all to witness. Plutarch, Life of Crassus, passage 32. Much of this display was for the benefit of the Greeks in Babylonia, who might think about supporting a Roman takeover of this crucial Parthian territory. But unlike the unfortunate false Crassus, the false Nero of AD 88 may have been a willing participant of Parthian political schemes. Perhaps King Pacorus II received enormous prestige from having someone dressed as a Roman emperor in his imperial court. The display would suggest that Rome was a far lesser power in world affairs than their rivals, the Parthian Empire. This was important in international politics because a struggle was occurring for control over commercial networks operating across Central Asia. In this era, the Han Empire of ancient China occupied the eastern edge of the vast Asian continent. The Han Empire was equivalent in size, wealth, and population to the Roman domains, but the two regimes were separated by thousands of miles of intervening territory. A regular network of trade systems, known as the Silk Routes, conveyed goods from China to Roman Syria. But these trade networks were under the control of intervening powers who frequently restricted foreign access to their territories. This allowed their own merchants to maximize the profits received from the traffic, conveyance, and sale of foreign goods. Consequently, the Chinese and the Romans had little information as to where their exports might be reaching. Neither knew what distant and powerful regimes existed on the opposite edges of Asia. In AD 9, the Chinese Empire lost possession of the Tarim kingdoms of Central Asia. This greatly foreshortened the Chinese diplomatic and military network. This occurred just as Rome emerged as a superpower in the distant West, under the first Julio-Claudian emperors. By AD 23, China was preoccupied by mass rebellion as vast armies were assembled to fight a destructive civil war. Consequently, for several generations, the restored Han Empire was largely inactive in distant foreign affairs. During this era, the Chinese gradually restored their population, infrastructure, and resources, and prepared for greater achievements. During the AD 70s, a resurgent Han Empire once more regained control over the Tarim kingdoms of Central Asia. This westward expansion extended Chinese rule as far as the Pamir Mountains, and shortened the trade routes between Iran and the Han regime by 1,000 miles. Completing these conquests, the Han Protector General Ban Chao sent envoys west to re-establish direct diplomatic contacts with the Parthian Empire. According to Chinese records, the Parthians responded in AD 87 by sending an embassy to China. This was received by the Han Emperor Zhang. The Parthian envoys offered the Chinese emperor exotic animals from the royal hunting parks of Iran. A Chinese text called the Huhan Shu, or Han Histories, reports, in the first Zhang He year, during the reign of the Emperor Zhang, The kingdom Anxi, or Sakid Parthia, sent an envoy to offer lions and Persian gazelle. Huhanshu, section 88. The dates coincide. The Third Pseudo-Nero appears exactly as Parthia re-establishes direct contact with the Han Empire. Diplomatic contacts with China were significant, as the Parthian Empire profited enormously from the caravan transfer of Chinese silks through Iran. The Huhanshu explains. Anxi, Parthia, wishes to control the trade in multicolored Chinese silks, and so blocks the route to prevent Da-Chin, the Romans, getting through. Huhanshu, section 88. In this era, large fleets of Roman ships sailed from the Red Sea ports of Egypt to India. A southern branch of the Silk Routes extended through the Indus kingdoms to reach northwest India. But Parthian princes prevented the Romans from following these routes inland to investigate the commerce of Central Asia. Nevertheless, imported artifacts and images of the Roman Empire were reaching Inner Asia through this trade system. An example is the exquisite Roman glassware found at Bagram in Afghanistan. These artifacts included painted scenes of gladiators and the monumental lighthouse at Alexandria. Eastern civilizations did not possess the technical skills to produce this delicate, translucent glassware. Through the Indus trade network, the Chinese could inspect valuable Roman trade products, while they gathered accounts of the Roman Empire from widely travelled Indian merchants. The Chinese were informed that the Roman regime matched their own empire in its size, population, and military capacity. Consequently, the Chinese began referring to Rome as Da-Chin, a name best translated as another Great China. Da-Chin clearly possessed great wealth, sophisticated forms of manufacture, and its commerce was economically significant to Parthia. From the available evidence, the Protector General Ban Chao therefore decided to make direct diplomatic contact with Rome. Perhaps he believed that Rome could be an important ally in Chinese efforts to control Central Asia. But how could the Chinese be certain that the current accounts of Da-Chin were not falsified or greatly exaggerated? King Pacorus would have been aware of the danger that direct Chinese-Roman contacts posed to Parthian economic, political, and military interests. Perhaps his exhibition of a Pseudo-Nero was a way to negate and control the international image of Rome. Whatever other reports and depictions indicated about Rome, the Western Empire was far less significant than Parthia. Was their true emperor not present as a subordinate at the Parthian court? Rome must be something less than Parthia in the politics of the distant West. The Nero impersonator may have performed for Pacorus, dressed as a showman, musician, in full imperial attire. Han envoys witnessing this spectacle at the Parthian royal court would obviously have questioned the international power and authority of Rome. A performing emperor seemed frivolous, thereby negating those who spoke of the far-flung military reputation of the Roman state. But was this impostor a genuine threat to existing Roman power? This second false Nero appears in a decade when the Roman Empire was suffering serious challenges and setbacks on its northern frontiers. The main threat came from the mountainous kingdom of Dacia, positioned in the territory of Transylvania, north of the Danube River. The conflict in Dacia required the urgent transfer of regiments from the militarized Euphrates frontier that divided Roman territory from the Parthian Empire. At this exact moment, Pacorus decided to escalate the tensions, threat, and challenges faced by Domitian by displaying the Nero impersonator. According to Tacitus, the Emperor Domitian was so incensed by this act that he was prepared to go to war against the Parthians. Perhaps this was due to the insult the impostor posed to imperial honour, or perhaps the pretender presented a genuine threat to imperial domains. When Tacitus describes the reign of Domitian, he says, "This was a period of history abundant with disasters, terrifying wars, destructive civil strife. Even the peace times were full of horrors. There were successes in the east, and disaster in the west. There were disturbances in Illyricum. Gaul faltered in its loyalty. Britain was completely conquered, and then the conquests immediately abandoned. The tribes of the Suevi, Germans, and the Sarmatians, Scythians, rose in unison against us. The Dacians had the glory of inflicting defeats upon us, but they too suffered defeats, and the armies of Parthia were set in motion by the falsehoods of a counterfeit Nero." Tacitus, Histories, Book 1, Passage 2. This suggests that King Pacorus may have been planning an incursion into Roman Syria or Asia Minor, and the false emperor was part of this scheme. This would occur while the eastern legions were under strength and Roman forces had been moved west to contend with hostilities in Dacia and Germany. Perhaps the Parthians planned to install this false Nero in the Syrian capital Antioch, and they expected popular support among the Asiatic Greeks. The Greek orator Diochrysostom probably alludes to this situation. He suggests that there was still widespread support for Nero among these Hellenized communities. Writing during the reign of Domitian, he reports, "As for Nero's subjects, nothing prevents them from believing that he should have been emperor forever. Even now, everybody wishes he were still alive, and the great majority believe that he does still live. In many ways he has died more than once, along with those who have been firmly convinced that he was still alive." Diochrysostom, On Beauty, Speech 21, Passage 10. Suetonius mentions another alarming aspect of this persistent Nero myth. He suggests that edicts issued by a soon-to-be-restored Nero were found in circulation, perhaps even publicly displayed in Rome. Suetonius reports, "There were even people who continued to circulate his edicts, pretending he was still alive and would soon return to confound his enemies." Suetonius, Life of Nero, Passage 57. These might have been random acts by dissenting groups within the Roman state, or maybe there was a genuine conspiracy existing in the main cities of empire. The plan would have been to encourage people's expectations and disseminate instructions to supporters of the former emperor. Perhaps a popular uprising in the Greek East, with a Parthian invasion, might have set a Nero impersonator on a path to actual imperial power. In previous civil wars, the legions had shown themselves willing to follow popular commanders in opposition to established emperors. Maybe the Parthians planned to bribe the governor of Roman Asia Minor to gain institutional support and crucial military aid. But the rise of this third Nero was not meant to be. Domitian used threats or monetary bribes to have the third Nero impersonator surrendered from Parthian control into Roman custody. Dio Cassius confirms, 20 years after Nero's death, when I was a young man, a person of obscure origin appeared. He announced that he was Nero. The name was still in such favour with the Parthians that they supported him vigorously and only surrendered him with great reluctance. Suetonius, Life of Nero, Passage 57. So that the Nero myth might not be acknowledged or further enhanced, the unfortunate impersonator was probably subjected to immediate execution and his remains destroyed in secret. But there is other intriguing evidence that a plot may already have been spreading through the Roman command structure in the eastern provinces. Domitian also had the Roman governor of Asia Minor, Civica Cerealis, arrested and executed that same year. It seems Cerealis had allowed support for the false Nero movement to fester and grow in the eastern provinces. This evidence may have been enough to have him convicted of facilitating a plot against the widely despised and politically distrustful Domitian. This was the final episode when a Nero appeared as a historical character. Logic dictated that, as the decades passed, any Nero would have to be presented as an elderly figure, far removed from the youthful performer depicted in statues, paintings, and imperial emblems. But the belief that Nero did not die persisted, and gradually a new myth emerged. This one portrayed an ever-young, semi-divine ruler, suspended in time, awaiting the chance to re-emerge in the East. From there he would reclaim his rightful domains and establish his imperial rule across the known world. The next lecture will consider the origins of this supernatural Nero. Thank you for your attention.